The following podcast is sponsored by Basico. At Basico, we understand your needs and pain points. Our expertise in CFO services, legal, finance IT, and people and payroll helps drive your business forward by inspiring change and challenging norms. We believe in deep explorative discussions and critical angles, the same spirit that fuels the Only Constant podcast hosted by our own Lasse Rindom. Discover more about Basico's vision and services at basico.dk. And if you like what you hear in this episode, please don't hesitate to share it with a friend. And now Lasse, take it away.
You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Shannon Lucas, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi Shannon, and welcome to The Only Constant. I'm thrilled that you're with me today on this episode, and I've been looking forward to speaking to you for a long time. I think we also had a really fun and engaging prep chat, so this could go anywhere.
We're glad to be here. I'm excited for the conversation, Lasse. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So Shannon, there's a lot of people talking about how AI agents should be just like employees. There's a kind of, an anthropomorphizing of this whole market going on. And I just want to ask you just straight out, do we need to add AI agents to our org charts? Because I've seen that and also a lot of books. Do you think they belong there?
I think it's the wrong first question because
Sorry.
Because it's a great question for the podcast, but it's the wrong first question for the organization. Because the org chart reflects accountability and design, decision rights, right? And so the question is if we go down that track, we're okay, which person is responsible or accountable for which decision that an agent made, et cetera. And then we're also in that question, we're not taking a step back and saying is the current way we think about org structures the right way? And so if we bolt them into already outdated models of org structures, again, we end up with a really suboptimal answer. And so we need to start by thinking about how do we redesign the work? If we have these tools, how are we redesigning the work? Are we going into a model where we're super customized and concierge and we have more humans and less agents, or are we going all the way to the other side where we're looking at efficiency? And we started to talk about this during our prep call. Sort of before all of that is this question of discernment, right? Because discernment is this ability to perceive and understand and judge things around us, particularly when the answer isn't obvious. So it's not going to be in some pre-existing data set that some agent was looking at. And interestingly, discernment really bridges logic and intuition. It's what allows us to tell the difference of the subtle variations of what's going on, or be is that really true in this particular case? There's a wisdom that we can talk about. And so we can't configure that yet in AI and AI agents. There's this deeply human capacity to do that. And I think that starting with discernment and thinking about and you'll hear me say this over and over again in the questions that we're talking about, what is all this going towards? I don't just want any employee, and this is what we work with organizations, I don't want you to take the commandment from on high and without thought or questioning implement it if what you come up with is data that says that we should do something differently. We need learning organizations with discernment now more than ever. And we're not going to get that having a huge agentic workforce without thinking about how we're bringing discernment into that relationship.
Oh, but that's I think I think you're raising some really interesting things here, because I'd say that we don't have autonomy in organizations, right? But now we're hunting for autonomous AI agents, and I'm have you ever seen an autonomous person already?
Exactly right.
But you're also raising another question, saying don't just take orders. Are you throwing a Hannah Arendt card here, or about evil.
I don't know who that is.
No, but she wrote about evil after the Second World War. The book about evil, Hannah Arendt, the philosopher. Basically, the point is that you can be evil without wanting to be evil. By being just a bureaucrat. In the bureaucrats in the Nazi in Nazi Germany, they just followed orders. Yeah, it is. But so we're 2 or 3 minutes in, I'm throwing the Nazi card. But
there we go. We got
no, but. Oh no, this is gonna go so wrong. But but the point is still right, because I think that's what you're still getting at, the evil, or let's call it the bad order, the bad decision, not to just follow it blindly. So you're talking about empowerment of people, but also empowerment of their responsibility or their accountability. I just think it's an interesting discussion, right? Because our structures, our silos, our org charts are built around sort of dispersing this accountability and making sure that people don't just go autonomously crazy doing something. And now you're saying something like the opposite. Something here is going on.
That's right. I think the reverse is importantly true. And I think it's important now more than ever because, if you go back to like the late 1800s when org charts were actually invented around, building out railroads and being more efficient, it was like the flow of data was slow enough that you could take data from the front line to this centralized decision-making committee called the C-suite and back out again and have that decision coming down from on high still be relevant to the environment that it was existing in. That's no longer true. And so we don't have time necessarily for all of the decisions to go up. And the world is more, it's not just faster, it's more complex. And so we need more people with different viewpoints, outlooks, all of the things participating in not just the collection of the data, but like the decisions that we're making on it. And so I don't know that I would, evil's is a very far end of the spectrum, but I do think we all have a responsibility to say, to what end are we doing this for?
But that also means, and now this question I just asked on a not yet published episode with Maria Sukareva and from Germany, and I asked her, are we going to have more managers or fewer managers in the future? And I think the thing we discussed there, I think the reason I said we were going to have more managers is because we will have more complexity and less simple work. So what you're actually saying is that the org chart was invented for a simpler time when everything was more conveyor belt, maybe more, simple work. A manager could have 50 people under him, but they were all doing the same, right? But now we sit in a situation where every employee is doing more complex work and he can actually be 10x by an AI. So we need to have that was my argument, have more managers managing fewer employees with higher and more complex output.
I would say that we need to rethink the org structure just more holistically, because I think, we've had matrix teams for a long time now, but the traditional silos, so having more managers, at least if we don't unpack that more, sort of means in the existing sort of org chart structure. But we need to work across silos now more than ever for the same reasons that I just talked about, because it's like what's happening on the digital marketing side for one company should be in conversation with what's happening on the digital product side. Like the boundaries are getting really blurred and the speed is really fast. And so one of the things that I'm obsessed with, we can talk about later, is Conway's Law, which is the product is the output of the design of the organization. And so I think that we just need to be thinking really differently about, do we have these like stand up rapid fire autonomous teams really that have some connection, obviously, back to the mothership. They understand the purpose and they understand the vision. They understand the guardrails. But then there has to be an autonomy. And so how we deal with hierarchy in that sort of autonomous cluster of people is an interesting question. But I don't know that we need a manager per se.
No, but I just think that it might be because everyone, weird enough, I think most people hate the middle manager, right? It's like, oh, that's just the fat layer. Let's get rid of it, so we can get to the meat, right? But it just seems like it's always so important because it's the one distilling the priorities, the decisions, the strategies, communicating back what's actually going on, what are we doing, making sure you hire the right people, that people are happy, the specialists work the way they're supposed to do. So are you saying that we'll have, fewer specialists in the future? Because I think we'll have more.
More specialists or more managerial specialists?
But more specialists, because if you have more specialists, people who are deeply specialized in a field, you'll also have the need for more people who can communicate and connect that to the whole, right? I think it's really interesting to discuss actually in some way.
It is a super interesting question. And I think that there's a temporal aspect to this, which will be really fascinating to unpack, because right now, the people that I think are the most successful with AI, and this isn't just a me thing, people are talking about this, are frankly sort of around my level of experience in organizations, because we have the depth of specialization, but the history, and you've talked about this too, the T career versus the I career.
Yeah.
And so right now, I think the people with the T career, because we have to look from this systems approach about how we're leveraging AI and what it means to our org structures, our ethics, our governance, like all of the things. What's a challenge is, how are the up and coming generations going to get any of that breadth of experience? I mean, there's just a challenge about what kind of experience the up and coming generations are going to get. And we could argue both actually is like, they're not going to get the level of specialization because AI is going to take so much of that really specific technical domain knowledge out of their hands, as it were. And so maybe the businesses will be looking to them to actually be able to bridge that upper T part, but how are they going to do that if they don't get the business experience as an entry-level person? So that's one of the things that people are really grappling with in terms of the future of the workforce. But I think you could argue that we'll be getting into sort of the specialization about how we're applying AI. Are you a healthcare AI application person? Are you a robotics AI application person? So I don't think it's a clear answer. I think it's going to be, like I said, generationally dependent, time dependent, industry dependent.
But everyone, I've had lots of people in our age span and above, but also some younger on the show, obviously, because you have to have experience also to have these kind of discussions. But
right.
but I think that what most of them would say is, I couldn't do what I do as a manager if I hadn't had the depth of working in, if I hadn't done, the field work or something, I couldn't be. But right now the field work is changing so much. So can you even be a manager? Are you getting disconnected from it already? So it's like, I used to do it, yeah, but now you don't, right? So you're becoming just a manager, but you keep saying that, that's because I'm like one of you, I'm one of you, no, you're not one of us. Do you get my point, right? So this is...
I do get your point, but it's interesting. So my son is 25 and he's working at an AI robotics company, and he was asking me sort of like he's managing people who are older than him. And it's kind of what you're saying he was like, I'm afraid that they won't listen to me because the perception is, he's 25, but he's been working for a really long time. But he's like, they won't accept me because I don't have the depth of experience of having done that thing yet. But also he doesn't have the experience of managing. But I'll say, I have a view of, the Gen Z through my son and his friends are the people that I know most closely. And they are all they are orders of magnitude more evolved on like the EQ and like all of those things that I think make great managers that I wasn't brought up with. Like, I think about how I was a manager in my late 20s, and it's like cringy. It's like, no one was telling me about emotional intelligence and curiosity and a coaching approach to leading and all of that, So
no, but I also think that there's some structure to it, right? You said also the org chart defines the output, right? And I think that there's some structure. I tend to think, very much I've also mentioned this on the podcast earlier in Titans and Olympians, right? That the world is chaotic, and what we want to do is bring order to it. That's always been, the human dream, and all of religion is about some kind of God or gods guaranteeing some kind of order in the chaos of reality, life, and nature, right? So my point is with that to say that if we just accept that, it's all about EQ and understanding and all that, and we're so agile all the time, right? But the companies need to have a defined output. Customers want to buy a thing from a company. They don't want to buy whatever the company feels like today, right?
I understand, but I think the current reality, this is the conversation that we're having with all of our customers and people in our network, is the reality is ambiguous, uncertain, volatile, right? Yeah. And so the organization does need some structure to be able to navigate that, but as we know, like, change is the constant right now. And so we need to help our people with all of the EQ skills and the curiosity and all of that, be able to sit in the ambiguity and then themselves have the discernment skills and some of the hard skills to be able to get the product to the customer in that ambiguous world. So I don't know that having like more structure is going to be the thing that's going to help deal with the uncertainty and ambiguity that just...
No, but maybe more granular structure. I don't know. I just think, the thing is, I think what you... I'm just, there's some justice for this, what you just called the old felt so archaic, right? I think there's a justice for that as well, because there was a reason why, okay, there's all the problems in it. But when I was a kid, trains arrived on time. I don't know if you have problems in your place, but I think trains
we barely have trains in the US, so it's such a bad... Unfortunately for us.
No, but there was just so many things that worked better.
Totally.
Earlier, right? And I'm only 42. I feel very old when I say it. But there's just some things when people just do one job.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of overly romanticizing the past.
No, me neither. So I also try to say with, a caveat that, but I don't, but there's still a thing that when you organize work that way, you can also optimize for the product, right?
In a less volatile and uncertain and complex world, that is true. That's no longer true, which is why those systems are breaking down. What I will say that I think is like a nugget in what you're saying is, I think it's clarity. So whatever your organizational structure is, whether we're like totally on the 1880s hierarchical or we're on the like holacracy, organize yourselves, it's having people understand what the context is that they're in. Yeah. And giving them the clarity about what the expectations are for them to be successful in those environments. And if like you're like, this holacracy shit is just too chaotic for me and I don't feel like I can be productive or give the customer what I want, then leave. Like go find a place where like the clarity of what's being expected of you is in alignment. This is an interesting problem, though, because I can pivot this to a conversation that we're having about like the culture. So if you think about the diffusions of innovation curve, right? And we have what we would call the catalyst on the sharp end. He calls the innovators, and we have the laggards on the other side. Where that sort of stood as a like general overlay to society has been relatively static, and especially in terms of how organizations function. They actually would design in a way. You don't want all crazy change agents, and you don't want all late adopters, right? So you would almost design for a mix if you were doing it intentionally. But the conversation that we've been in, especially with a lot of HR leaders in the past few years, is the whole curve has shifted. So like what were laggards before, they're irrelevant, becoming irrelevant, right? And like even thinking about having this, I call it shifted to the left, this shifted to the left laggards, it's still like, I don't know how they're going to fare, but like the amount of change that organizations and the cultures of organizations have to be able to metabolize has just increased. And we're talking exponentially really with AI now.
But also, at the same time, there's also, and this is another discussion, we're not going to necessarily get into that right now, but that AI agents also actually need to have, specific tasks and org charts. Just, what are you going to work on? But humans maybe then wouldn't. Maybe that's the shift. But I've had this discussion multiple times, right? Also with CFOs who are like, I just need some innovators because I have so many people just doing, what they always did. But you're like, yeah, but you don't really want to just have innovators because they will just innovate and then they don't want to do the job when they've innovated.
That's it. They'll get it done. And then they're like, that's us. I'm a catalyst. So you get bored with the process. You're like, I figured out the problem. I've even created all of the standard operating procedures, but ask me to do that for another year and I'm going to die. Yeah,
I've optimized it as much as it can. Yeah. Now someone else who is a laggard can take it over. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. So, but you're saying that there's a shift to have more of those.
I'm just saying, like, even for the laggards, their ability to handle some amount of change has shifted, because even if I handed them, to your point, the standard process to manage the agents, what the agents are capable of now compared to like 6 months from now, we're not even talking 3 years from now, we're talking 6 months from now is going to be so different that the laggards still have to be able to handle that level of change, which that's why the whole thing is shifted. Because before the laggards would have been like, I'm not even touching that,
But is that maybe also a result of the whole digital change in society? That social media over the last 20 years, everyone sort of adopted that, and everyone's adopted the new social media, and everyone's adopted the new smartphone, the new streaming. If I look at my parents, what they've adopted over the last 15 years, even though they're quite old, is quite amazing. Actually, if you look back at their parents and what they adopted over 15 years, absolutely nothing, right? But the parents around 70, my parents are around 70, 75, something like that. I know their age, of course, but they've just adopted so many things, and if you go to, and they would be, the laggards, you call them that, and is that just because
are they laggards because they're? Are you saying that they're laggards because they're in their 70s, or are your parents actually like they've been anti-technology?
They would traditionally be viewed as the types that would have been laggards. Yeah, I think because they don't work in, they don't have academic careers. They don't work in anything like that. They just, but they still adopt so many things, right? They've gone away from cable. They've gone over to streaming. They've adopted social media. They've gone to smartphones. They don't have an electric car yet, but they still have, systems in their car, right, to help them drive and all that. So I just think that so many things have moved, and we've been forced to accept that as a general premise that maybe that's what has moved the laggards on, right? To become a different type of laggard or a more dynamic laggard.
I think that's right. I think my point is
maybe just a conservative, incremental laggard, right? Instead of just a naysayer.
Yeah, there's the active naysayer laggards, and then there's just sort of the default laggards. There's some, my dad is probably, and I considered becoming a Neo-Luddite in my 20s, how do I feel about technology and where this is headed? And my dad is very much on the Neo-Luddite camp. He did finally get an iPad so that he could read his Kindle thing in bed at night. But he's the active laggard. I think there are laggards that are just meh, I'm not leaning it. I don't really want to do it. I don't want to change. I think what I think is important about this conversation is having the conversation as we're designing organizations to be adaptive for the future, really thinking about where we need, not necessarily where we are, but where we need our organization to be in terms of shifting that change curve as we sense our industries. Some industries are getting disrupted way faster than others. And so they are going to have to really think about that more deeply than, some of the other more traditional ones that, everyone's getting disrupted now. I was sitting here, what industry might not have to think about it?
Yeah, and okay, I'm going to push one through you because I thought about that, challenging you with that. How about public institutions, right? If you're governed by law, you are conservative.
So both of my parents worked in state government my entire life. And so I got a upfront view. And so my mom, I didn't get to talk about her. She at 70 got her PhD in organizational design and online networks. So she is she's on the Catalyst side of things.
Yeah, but in public organizations, if you have the law, I've always been like this it's been in Denmark at least for the last 20 years something. Public organizations have to adopt agile, but you can't sit around defining a product that might come at some point. You have a law. You have to administer the law. It's been decided. It's just trickle down, waterfall, fix it, right?
Yes, and so in principle, I think that it is the place that is the most outdated. If you look at the Edelman, I don't know if you follow the trust index that we have, government in the US is the least trusted institution or, pillar of society. And I think partly because it's just so terribly outdated in terms of how it works. So I'm not going to argue different than that. I will say there are pockets, there's a woman, Virginia Hamilton in our network who was actually brought in by a previous administration to bring design thinking into the White House so that they could actually, and then have that, and it was very intentionally trickle this down through the different agencies within the federal organization. And the interesting thing, because I hate the bad rap that government workers get, because so many of them actually are there in service, and they just got lit up. They're it goes back to agency. I have agency because they want to help the people who are coming in. If they're working in that kind of an institution, they want to help the people who are coming in. But if they haven't been given agency and they have all of this bureaucracy on top of them, that's a shit position to be in. Yeah. So there are pockets where that's happening, Lasse, but I agree. I think we need to look deep and hard at our social contracts with our public institutions and how they're functioning. Because in the US, it's really, really broken.
Yeah, but you also want, power to be in the hands of the lawmakers, right? So I think, I'm just saying that, as you said, we have to look at the org chart. We also have to look at the different rationale, structures. Because they're not everyone is an agile startup.
I agree, no, completely. But I do say, do we want?
I please don't have my aviation company either. I don't want them to be let's try with one pilot instead of two. Well, let's see what
Totally. Okay, so let me respond to two things there. One about the lawmakers. I'm not sure that I want the lawmakers making all the laws in the U.S. Like, I don't know if you heard about the thing that came down from the Commerce Department about Anthropic, about having, non-nationals working on AI. I mean, like,
of course
that broke overnight, right? That is like the dumbest thing ever. So I'm not sure that the people, because our system is so structurally broken, to your point, I think that those people are not the most qualified to be making the decisions, and certainly not at the speed with the level of complexity that they're in. That's the world they're in. You bring an interesting point though. Like, we did a co-creation when I was at Ericsson with GE, and it was with GE Aviation. And so we were bringing, if you look at my background, I'm very much design thinking, innovation, agile, lean startup, all of the things. And so we were bringing this very collaborative, co-creative thing, but they are literally making jet airplanes. Yeah. And so there's this tension of, you can still bring in the new ways of operating, because we have to operate at speed, and we have to test things, and we have to find the biggest leverage points for the problems that we can solve with the most expediency, et cetera, et cetera. And you're right. This just comes back to constantly, what is the context that you are sitting in, and using discernment to apply the right tool to the right problem.
Because I think, the challenge is that, and I've said this so many times also on the show, that there's two mega trends, right? One trend is that we can do anything with technology and lots of action, but then there's compliance and regulation and customers expecting products and guarantees and all that. On the other hand, that is also increased. Cybersecurity, is increasing as much as the speed of execution. On the other hand, because
let's hope.
Bad actors are also. So I think that constraints will be just as much as the innovation push. But I'm just looking at, is this a dialectic thing? Shannon, you're saying, oh, now we have more catalysts, right? But will we see a reverse to the other again? And will we be going back and forth, or will the battle get even stronger? Will the clash of titans become a regular war?
I'm not arguing for a higher percentage of catalysts necessarily. And actually, I was going to make this comment earlier. What we know from research is that on average, any organization has between 5 and 11% of catalysts, let's say. But that depends on the actual culture of the company or the industry that they're in. That's not universal. That's an average across all of those things, right? I think, so the other thing I wanted to say about what you just said about this dialectic is, we were just in conversation with a woman who was a CIO of a Fortune 10 company and now serves on public boards. And we were talking about our recent research report, which is the exponential engine workforce in the AI era, and asking her, like, okay, this was a closed group of executives, asking her, like, so with all of this information and research, what do we do about it? And it was quiet in the room. These are other CEOs and CHROs. There's quiet in the room. And so she leans in. She's like, look, there's two things that we know at the board level. One, every organization is running on assumptions right now, because every organization should be thinking about AI, and it's all assumptions. She's like, you need to be clear that that's how you're operating. And you need to be transparent about the assumptions. We could call them hypotheses too, and that you're testing them and that you're getting the feedback loop. Okay, that assumption was wrong, right? That's the first thing. And then the second thing she said is, you need a workforce that is agile and can learn. She's like, those are the two things that we know that are foundations for organizations, and everything else is kind of up for grabs.
Yeah, but that's also, that's a crazy flux also, right? That's a crazy flux, and flux is not good for anything. Typically, I'm a historian, right? And I know you're an art historian as well, right? Back in your day, but I'm a historian, and I always, the first I realized that during my master's degree that the most important thing in history is stability. That's where societies flourish, humans grow. And now we're just in a completely unstable. We're getting to something that's completely unstable, right?
I'm going to argue differently. So when I was in my 20s, and I was considering, so just a little bit of background about me, so that people understand like how nerdy I was at this point when I was making this decision. Like, I begged my way in summer camp into the computer lab. I didn't even know what a computer was, but I knew that I was in third grade. And I was like, I want to go do that thing. I was down that rabbit hole. I was on BBSs, IRC, MUDs, I became a network engineer with an art history degree after this fact. So I was really into technology, and I had this semi-utopian possible version, but there was also the dystopian version. So in my 20s, I'm like, do I want to be a neo-Luddite? It's like, there's a lot of appeal to that. I'm terrified about where this could go. But when I sat down and I looked at history, and I looked at the increase in technology from let's start with the railroads and the telegraph. From then until where I was as a 20-something, women are no longer property. We have more gender equality. We have more racial equality. We have a middle class that didn't exist. We live close to double, what we were in previous centuries, on and on and on and on. And so, like, if I look at the number of lives that have gotten better in the last 100 years because of technology, it's incontrovertible that more people have benefited from it.
Yeah.
And those took radical social changes. Those birthing pains were tough, right? I mean, the suffragist movement went on for forever. We had a civil war over slavery. And so it was in the moments of like, who are we and what do we want to be and what do we want to fight for and who do we want to bring forward with us? That's where we got these more elevated, democratic, enlightened societies.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Now this is my rabbit hole moment. So maybe I should be careful what I do right now, because I agree with you, but I also think that the overall structure is sort of this democratic society. There's a respect for government. I know there are protests and everything. There's a respect for government. The government governs, and I think that the lack of trust in authorities in general our trust in authorities has been inherited from royalty over centuries, where they were just there, power, panopticon, and then we gave it to the people. And by giving that to the people, we didn't give it
to the people. We did not give it to the people. Americans fought for. We had an American Revolution that was all about kicking out a king and setting up a federalist democracy.
Okay. But in Denmark, it was given to the people, to be honest. But even though you had a revolution, it was still the same panopticon shadow structure of authority that was taken over by the Republic. And I would argue that any day. So you still felt like, just the people, disciplining the people. We were making laws for ourselves to govern ourselves. There was no king doing it anymore. But I'm not
arguing for chaos, Lasse. I just want to be clear. But you were saying that stability is the benefit of society. And I'm like, no, we have these birthing pains and then we come back to some level of equilibrium. You know what I mean? I don't want to live in the American Revolution for the rest of my life. That's not what I'm arguing for. No, but that's also
what I'm saying is just that the challenge is that, I think there's a lot of questioning of everything right now. And I think questioning of everything means it is, there's always these, you can move, you can always, also as an employee, you can be exposed or challenged on different dimensions all the time, but you can't be challenged on all dimensions, because then you just get anxiety. And what I'm nervous about is if we're going to have societal anxiety, because then humans don't flourish, societies don't flourish. We don't do universal suffrage. We don't do these things when we're in a state of anxiety. Then
agreed. This is a really great conversation, because and this is where like the existential threat is having partly that effect on society right now. There's so we go to the neurochemistry of change. Everyone, even if you're a catalyst, you are going to go into the amygdala hijack, the fight, flight, or freeze. That is the first phase of the reaction of what you're talking about. But the good news is that we have a prefrontal cortex, and we are humans, and we have the ability to self-moderate and to manage ourselves. And so after we've had that initial shock and reaction, we're very likely to not just sit for the next decade and not do anything. We're going to be like, okay, this is really scary. There's a lot to contemplate here. Back to discernment. What do I want to do? What outcome do I want? What steps do I need to take? But I'll say in an organizational structure. So we're like literally teaching this next week to a bunch of executives. You have to understand that as a leader, right? You have to understand that you yourself are going at that. So how are you going to manage? And then that your people are going through that. What you're talking about, and what tying back to earlier when I was like, look, if we have these like more autonomous groups that are functioning, these matrix teams or whatever, I was like, you need to have clarity. Like, what's the purpose? What's the vision? Give them the guardrails. You have to have accountability is a place that you were going with that. Yeah. And that's how do you have empowerment? It's the empowerment plus the accountability that equals the results. And you can't have just one half of that equation. In the past, you could have just the accountability and the results, because that was the old hierarchy model. You're like, you are not empowered. I am telling you what to do. I'm telling you, you are a cog in my machine, in my industrial factory. I'm telling you what to do, right? That doesn't work anymore. And so there's a level of empowerment that we need because the system is complex and adaptive. If we don't recognize that we are actually living in a complex adaptive system, and we need to have the skills on a personal level, leader level, and an organizational level, we're not going to survive very long. And that's the whole thing about the, people falling off the S&P, or organizations in the U.S. Organization, corporations are people too, but falling off the S&P.
No, but I think this is. I thought so many thoughts when you were talking about this, because I when you say accountability and empowerment, I think also about authority and power as well, because those two are historically also separated in a way. That's exactly what I said. The king transferred the authority to the republic. So I'm going back to that weird picture again, because this was actually a key focus of my master thesis. So I think it's interesting.
Louis didn't. Louis was like, "Oh, I got a guillotine. I didn't want to give up that power."
No, but he actually did, because especially the French kings, they sort of didn't govern anymore. They were just hidden in gardens, being symbols of authority, and then some ministers were governing in their place. So the separation of authority and power from the medieval kings that kept on traveling around the land and exercising their power in person, that sort of shifted in early modernity. And then in the modern phase, we've sort of taken that authority and embedded it in our more democratic structures. This is super interesting, actually. But when we don't do it, the reason why I'm getting back to that, because the reason why we centralized all these authority in these people was because the alternative was exactly chaos, right? So this granularity of empowerment and accountability, or where everyone has empowerment and accountability on smaller and smaller levels, could just as easily become everyone's struggle against everyone. A purely Thomas Hobbes evil scenario. The evil state of nature, right? I'm getting. I've never mentioned. I don't think I've mentioned Thomas Hobbes before on this show, but. There you go. But I just think that it is. I just think this is like super central to understand the challenges we're in right now. And I don't necessarily think we're going to get to an answer right now either, because this also translates into how AI is going to operate. Are we going to have autonomous AI agents that are going to be empowered and accountable on a small level? Are we going to be structuring them in scaffolding them? Or, are we going to stop scaffolding people and start scaffolding AI agents instead? Or there's just so many routes here that I think are... unclear, right? And that's why, but things are definitely happening. Yeah, exactly.
The lack of clarity is part of the rationale, though, for needing some of this agency in the system. Look, I think as I hear you talking about it, I hear you positing two different extremes. Like, it's going to be chaos if we give everyone empowerment, or we need total control from a central authority. And I just think it's more nuanced than that. And that's why I go back to the cultural, the context within which it's operating. Look, I'm not saying that we're not going to have CEOs of companies, and the CEO is responsible to the board. That, I'm not arguing it's a fucking free for all. Come show up and do what you want to do at work today, right?
Yeah, but there are trends there, right? There are companies saying that, we've gotten rid of all titles, right? Yeah, but there's still someone who can fire you,
Well,
someone who can promote
exactly,
you.
And that's why I go back to the clarity. It's like you have to have the clarity of the system that you're operating at. The one of the examples that we use, the book that we have people read about this, is David Marquette's "Turn the Ship Around." And if you're not, are you familiar with this?
No.
He was a Navy.
I only know old philosophy.
Yeah. So this is not old philosophy. This is a contemporaneous guy. But very quickly, he was a Navy admiral, captain. I don't know enough about these things, but he inherited basically one of the worst performing ships, and he had this theory that he had tried out in a different context, but didn't take it far enough, and so it failed. And so he's sort of like, I got this ship that's the worst performing, so there's not a lot to lose. So I'm going to try this new system. And also because things unfolded in front of him that reinforced, if I had this system, I think that wouldn't have happened. And essentially, and it goes along with also McChrystal's team of teams, which is the intelligence is at the edges of these complex systems now. And it's sort of what I was saying earlier, in the Gulf War, they didn't have time for the stuff to go up to central command, make a decision and come back down. That wasn't how the enemy was operating, right?
No.
And so they empowered. The people knew what the goal of the mission was. They knew what the goal of the war was. They still had an operating structure. They still had a general. And David Marquette, he was still the commander of this ship. But he said, look, the people who are in this middle management who are making ridiculous decisions because they just don't know enough about the system are the things that are actually causing catastrophic issues in even in peacetime, but in a warship or whatever. And so what he talks about, he has sort of this graph, and it's on one side is control, and on the bottom is competency and clarity. And so you can give people varying levels of control, and that will be context dependent. It does require, though, that they have clarity about what they're supposed to be doing and the competency to be able to execute on those two things. And if you're not and there's this really nice curve, right? If you give too much control without the competency and clarity, to your point, you get chaos. It's a free-for-all. Everyone can do whatever they want. Nobody knows what to do and nobody can do it. I'll just finish. If they go on this side, if the person has too much competency and they totally understand what they're supposed to do, but everything they have to get approved by their boss, they're frustrated and they'll leave, right? So I think it's just looking at it a nuanced picture and turning the dials of how much empowerment, how much accountability, how much organizational hierarchy, how much,
But it's like always, when you're allowed to make decisions in any situation, right? You need to have shown that you can be trusted. So you need to have this level of discipline, right? You have to have shown over time that you have discipline. That's, in any army, any navy, discipline is the first thing. So if you're disciplined, then you can get empowered and be allowed to make decisions in this framework of how we make decisions. But now you said earlier about your son. I'm not going to talk about your son, but in general, the new employees coming in, the rapid innovation is making room for more, EQ and how do I feel, what I want to do today, and that sort of becomes equal to morale. Morale is defined by how much influence I have on my own work, how I feel, how my coworkers, and that's not necessarily disciplined workers.
Let me give you okay. So I'm going to double click on the example of my son because part of the but listen, it's interesting because part of the conversation that he was having.
My son is great.
But part of the conversation, he was great. I'll let you talk with him. But the conversation that he was having with this person is you can't always go work on the shiny object.
No.
He's the mature leader understands that you have to deliver. I remember when I got sat down in my mid-20s and I was at Microsoft and network engineer and I thought I was hot shit. I was an art history major who was a senior network engineer at Microsoft 3 years later. I was I am hot shit. And the guy was I was delivering, but he's you need to deliver a lot more before you have that attitude, right? To your point. And so that's the conversation. It wasn't all about EQ and fuzziness. The conversation he was having is you need to be able to deliver the boring foundational infrastructure that allows all the other amazing things to happen. That's the rigor of having the EQ. Yes, I see the contributions of the work that you're doing and your contributions are important and you need to deliver. So that was the landing is yes, I'm not saying that people don't need to deliver. You need to be able to prove, to earn the control that you want to move up on that axis on.
Thank you. Did you hear that, AI agent? You need to prove that you can deliver before I give you autonomy.
And I need you to consider my feelings while you're doing it.
Oh no, this was totally a speech for AI agents. Just give it to ChatGPT. But Shannon, you just said again, you're an art historian. I really want to dive into that because I always love these quirky backgrounds. I've had quite a few on my podcast as well. Actually, I'm a quirky background myself. Maybe that's why it's a little bit of self-love here.
Totally.
But but what do you bring from your background into AI technology and business? What do you bring from your art historian degree? What was your degree about? What was your master thesis?
That's a great question. So I want to just caveat, art history, people have this really, what's your impression of art history actually before I share?
That you just walk around museums looking at Salvador Dali and comparing him to how Cubism evolved or something like that.
100%, totally. That's what everyone thinks. We had all of these people from all these different majors who were I'm going to go get an easy A in art history. And a handful of them every time would like drop out mid-semester. Like this was
you're
not
just like
easy
you're just
I
like
thought
someone
it was
like,
gonna
oh, I
be.
just want to go to Barcelona. I just want to see Gaudi. I just really love this, you know.
Okay, to be fair, to back you up, I did end up going to Paris for my university, so there was some of that. But
there you go.
That was very intentional. But art history is it's an interesting lens, right? Because it's actually a very rigorous approach to understanding. Yes, you have these visual artifacts that that are the focus of what you're studying, but you have to understand everything that I was just talking about. So it is very much a systems approach. You have to understand the history, the philosophy, the gender dynamics, the socioeconomic dynamics, what was happening from colonialism. Like there isn't an aspect of society and human experience that isn't somehow captured in the things that you are learning. And then when we talk about I loved the American University of Paris. I have to give them their props because the senior thesis project was taking an epistemological approach to understanding one artist in one period of their life. So I picked Cézanne's early years because I hated it, and I knew if I was going to spend a year studying it, I couldn't hate it more. And I was like, maybe I'll like it more by the time that I'm done. I can't say that I did, but and so it was really. It was fascinating though, right? Like looking at Cézanne through Marxist lenses, through feminist lenses, through like all of the different lenses. And so that's what I love about art history is it really made you get deeply curious about like, what is going on at the foundational level, but then there isn't, if we talk about like the only constant is change, there isn't a thing that is the interpretation of Cézanne. Cézanne himself probably had different ideas on any given day about the work that he was doing.
Yeah, so you're saying that, what you're bringing is basically the understanding that to companies and to enterprises and to business and to tech, that it's all about narratives and perspectives. And I think if you don't have, I think that's very valid because I think we're often missing that. We're often thinking that all of this boils down to an Excel spreadsheet. But then I've started telling, CFOs and controllers that, everything you put in an Excel spreadsheet is also a narrative. Also telling a story about how the company is performing, and you're choosing the data. It's what a narrative you choose, story.
Exactly right.
The notes
totally.
you're putting to it is a narrative.
Exactly right. And it's like we could be a B Corp and be tracking different things than if we're a for-profit, or we're moving from stakeholder capitalism to shareholder capitalism. Those are all narratives about like what the purpose of business is. And so I think that's right. That's the pivot for me is like, so what is the context, and do we have, I think there's another thing there, which is like the understanding that the sum of the parts, the diversity of the thoughts actually gets us to better outcomes is sort of like, my more holistic understanding of Cézanne was better in the end, rather than just having like the, art history 101, he's this much, and that's someone's already put the narrative through the filter, and I don't even know what that filter is,
So what you're saying about discernment is just basically the way you look at the world ambiguously, and you think it's always multiple perspectives and multiple facets, is basically just, a result of your art historian degree.
Well, there's probably a chicken and egg. Like, why did I study art history in the first place and go to Paris? But yeah, I think there's at least a connection there.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, cool. But I think this narrative thing, right? I think in the world of AI, I think it's also interesting to discuss a little bit that there's this weird fooling people are fooling themselves a little bit to believe that AI models could be neutral. Could anything ever be neutral? But why do we think that they could be neutral? Is it because it's just a machine, right? And it's not, let's say, like someone who wants to steal your wife and your cattle, right? So we tend to believe machines must be neutral.
I liked that example in the notes. Yeah.
I've actually had that in my notes, right? Exactly. So, but I think it's a little bit interesting that we think machines are neutral, right? And data is neutral. And why are we fooling ourselves here?
Okay, so we just have to contextualize the entire conversation we've had as a postmodern conversation, right? And this and this is what I love about your approach. It's just like we are constantly questioning, trying to get to some like foundational truth, and they don't exist. That's kind of like what postmodernism helps us understand, right? And so I agree, there is no neutral. We already know that, right? The data that the LLMs are trained on the existence, the compilation as of what human society has been doing so far, and there's a lot of bias and all of the things. So like, We already know that it's not neutral. I think the narrative is incredibly important though, right? So, and this is where like the reductive thinking of like, it's going to save us all, it's the future, or, oh my God, we're going to be, the Terminator's coming to get us and we're all dead, or the Singularity's coming, is not particularly helpful. I think they're fun thought experiments, don't get me wrong. Yeah. I think that there's a really valid reason to play those scenarios out and everything in between.
But they're both sci-fi stories, right? In the end.
That's it, totally. And I'll also say that I think that the power of storytelling is incredibly important here. When I was at Cisco, I organized the first blockchain lab where we had like Citibank and Intel and GE and a bunch of companies coming in, and we were focusing on securing the digitized supply chain with blockchain. It was like the big first, like we bought the nerds out of the closet and we're trying to figure out how to apply this to society. And one of the things that we did was we did create a dystopian vision of what a non-secured supply chain would look like a nuclear bomb getting into the US. And it does inspire people to start to think about the security challenges that they need to be thinking about, right? And so I think we need to be careful about the storytelling that we're doing to make sure that we're sort of having people think holistically about where this is going, where they want it to go, and what their role in solving those or driving those outcomes, I guess I will say. It's got to be nuanced though, and it's got to be, I think, a bit more inclusive. I mean, the frontier labs right now, that's the part of all of this that makes me nervous, is that there's a handful of people who are sitting in these positions of having the narratives. I mean, OpenAI's narrative has changed pretty significantly in the past. Yes. There's a huge lawsuit for like what the narrative around OpenAI is. And that's dangerous because there was kind of this like baked in assumption, rightly, about what their intention was from day one. And then when the semi-coup happened in September of 2024, when was that?
23, I think.
Anyway,
I don't remember. Yeah, it was fun.
I know it feels like forever ago. I don't think it was that long ago, but like people were left with this, like, but OpenAI was like meant to like fight against the Terminators taking over. That was the point.
No, but everyone who fired him was believing that they could be Terminators, right? That's the problem.
No, exactly. That's my point.
So they were all like a little bit narcissistically, on a different planet, all of them. Anyway.
Totally, 100%. And it's complicated. It's super complicated. And I listened to Sam Altman, like Nicholas Thompson just did this great interview with him. And it's like, I probably shouldn't say this because I'm going to get people commenting. And I'm like, he's not a stupid guy, like I think he is a human who also lives in fear of the outcomes. And then Anthropic has their own like narrative around what AI is. And that's actually literally gotten them into trouble with the government. I think that the story of Anthropic has gotten them in more trouble with the government than probably, at least up until recently, the tech. So I think the conversation around the AI narrative is incredibly important.
Yeah, but I also think that, that one of the things that I've realized during the podcast here is that how many times we've had to say that, language is power, narratives is power. Now you also have Carissa Velez coming out with a book called Prophecy. I think it's really interesting. I hope to get her on the show later. She's very much in the air right now everywhere, but basically saying that prophecy is power and everyone's predicting the future right now, and that is shaping our future as well. And I just think that this is becoming so relevant, and also working with language model. What is language? Is language literally, neutral?
Totally,
it's totally literally that question as well, right? And I think it's just people are missing that, right? I think people are stuck in some weird misunderstanding. And now back to your art historian, that naturalists are actually depicting nature as nature is, which was
never true.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So I was actually almost going to ask you, what was the refutal of the naturalist? Why did people move on to expressionism and all that? Or what actually happened there? Because maybe there's some answers there, right? Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Well, modernity happened. I mean, like the
estrangement happened.
We could unpack that a lot, but I want to go back to I think the prophecy is power, because that was the point, is like, if you're, I go back to like, okay, a company has a purpose and then they set a vision, and you can talk, or strategy, whatever word you want to use. That's the thing. That's the guiding principle, the North Star that's organizing what everyone is working on. And I think now more than ever, between purpose and strategy or vision, we need to be really intentional about what we're doing, because that is the narrative that becomes the guiding force. And it has power. Just saying the words and putting that vision out there has power, especially, it's not just Shannon talking with her friends at the cafe, especially now if you're in an organizational setting and that becomes your organizing principle, it has exponential power, right? And so there's also, we just go back to where the context of the narrative is. It's fine to have some of these, and it's not a judgment. We should have all the conversations in all the places, but we really intentional about where we're doubling down in certain circumstances.
Yeah, because some organizations right now are firing a lot of people saying that AI is making them redundant, and other organizations have just read called a post today saying that, well, we don't have AI in our strategy because we are not an AI company. We of course will use it if it makes sense, but why should I have it in my strategy and all that, right? So I think there's like the polls, right, and the narratives that are being spoken are directing different things and on different edges, right? It's just really aggressive right now.
In our research, there was this, and I won't get the numbers, so I'll just use the broad abstraction. There was this research that was done about how people feel in terms of the threat to their jobs. Is it going to be a positive thing or is it going to be a negative thing? And this probably won't surprise you, but the spread is incredible. The people who work in the tech-ish/AI, but even tech broadly, were massively positive. Say like in the 75% that it was going to be a good thing for the future of work and blah, blah. And people who don't work in that was like 20-something% positive. So there was like a 50-point spread between, and I don't think that's a narrative. That's a narrative play because nobody knows for sure, right?
No, but the weird thing about that is that coders are the ones, AI agents
I know, we can unpack that 100%, totally.
AI code is the most ripe use case for AI at all, right? And they feel secure that it will become more complex, but everyone else where it's still failing, they're like super scared. I'm like, what is going on here?
Yes, and I'm going to go to another podcast that I just listened to. It was I won't be able to pronounce his last name, but he's a Stanford economist, and a student came to him at Stanford and was a techie engineer, computer engineer. And she was like in tears about the prospects for her future because she was commenting exactly on that. And he's like, the difference is now, if you have a brilliant idea, you have the tools at your disposal to go do your tiny little startup and possibly get funding on it. So there is a weird democratization potentially, like, don't just focus on the problems or the organizations that are getting solved today. There's going to be a lot more small companies solving interesting problems, and that might be the place where those engineers can find. Yeah,
and if I'm right, we're going to have more managers, so you're going to have a fine managing job.
Because we're going to have more companies.
More complexity and more.
That was a footnote.
No, but I've said this before also, right? Whenever we can do something more, we invent something more complex, and our value chains and our supply chains get more complex. It's been like that forever, and I'm like, why should that ever change? And when things get more complex, we need more complex controlling, more complex managing, more complex everything. I'm just saying, we're not going to get rid of everything we're doing today. We're going to move to the next fractal and do things more complex. That's, but okay. But you also said before about narratives, right? I think that, and we spoke about this also in the prep about social responsibility. Are people too little preoccupied with that? Are we talking a little bit about that? I think also, was it 2 years ago, something that Microsoft got rid of their global ethics team on AI or something like that. And just as they announced Copilot, I think actually they did it in the same week, which seems a little bit weird, right?
So I was curious about your framing on this question. What do you mean by, do we see too much of it right now?
No, but I mean that we see too much on see what it can do. We're so focused on the action part of AI, that all the things that maybe it can do, all the code it can produce, all the writing it can do, but we're not really thinking about how we're going to move people along, how we're going to change this. I think that in the end, social responsibility also means that we discuss that if there is no workers to buy the things the robots produce, there will also be no robots, right? So, you can't have Jeff Bezos just buying his own shit, right? So, no, but
so an interesting tidbit that I heard on the podcast with Sam Altman is that he had the company WorldCoin because he was a big believer in universal basic income, and he's now shifted his position and said that he thinks that like society should basically like have ownership, whatever that means, in this big bubble that's being created. So I just wanted to throw that in there because I thought that was super interesting.
Communism.
It was really interesting. I wanted him to unpack that one more, and he didn't. So my contention is that we're not thinking about it enough. Yeah, I think that there's the human impact piece. It's like with great power comes great responsibility. And I was already on a mission. My sort of personal mission statement was to make the world's largest organizations more sustainable in every sense of the word, for people, for planet, and profit. But that's even more urgent now because of the speed and the magnitude of everything that's happening. And there's this weird like predeterminism. They're like, well, we have to release Mythos because the speed is happening and stuff is going to happen anyway. And so we have to do it. And it's like, well, it's such a weird logic loop, right? But so anyway, I'm like, so what are we doing? I go back to the Neolithite example. If we're not using technology to improve human lives and maybe existence for all living things, what are we doing?
No, but I think that this anthropic thing was funny because, saying that, this is so incredibly dangerous, kill everyone and kill everything, destroy all the systems, right? So I made this post where you had Oppenheimer saying, just like Amadeus said a couple of days later, we're going to release this model to the world, to the public in a couple of days. Like, so what if Oppenheimer said, we're going to release this nuclear bomb into the hands of the public in a couple of days just to see what happens?
100%.
What?
Where'd the logic go?
Yeah, exactly. There's no connection between the two statements from you, Amadeus, right? What are you doing?
But it is the narrative and has been the narrative for a while, having lived in Silicon Valley for the last 20 years. It's like the inevitability of the tech becomes its own like free pass. It's like, well, now I will say, like in the executive community that we have like former, NSA and CIA leaders, and they're like, and this is the biggest reason to do it is from a geopolitical perspective, if not us, then who? It's a scary premise. But anyway, going back to the social responsibility piece, the other thing that we have to look at is the environmental impact. I mean, it's just like and there's a thing like, can we get the AI to solve some of the environmental problems? We hosted a roundtable on this conversation. And I think that's the hope, right? Is like, it'll be smarter things than us that can analyze the complexity of the systems. I mean, I've been working on digitizing supply chains for like 20 years. It's horrible to say out loud. So can we solve some of the problems using this tool? But then you're hoping, it's a hope. We're like, we hope that the justification of using this tool while we're churning out all of this negative impact on Earth is like,
I discussed this with Mahmoud Aziz also in an episode that at this moment will air tomorrow, hopefully. But he said that they're building 18 data centers across Scotland. I'm like, okay, for AI, I get that. I also work with AI. I'm pushing it, but there's still so many companies who haven't seen a return on investment and value from this yet on the large scale. And now you're building 18 data centers in Scotland alone for this. I'm like, and you're thinking about powering up the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant as well to power AI, and the hope.
It's a hope.
Yeah, but hope is a nice thing, right? As Kate O'Neill said on the podcast in episode 50, is that, we do debt because we have a hope for the future, right? So
that's right.
But this could also be just, a very large environmental and technical financial debt that we're pushing on the future, saying that we think we're going to need these GPUs. We hope.
Correct.
And are we overdoing that a little bit, Shannon? Are we getting lost in sci-fi?
If I could answer that, Lasse, I'd be very rich right now.
What's your hunch?
But well, I think it's a J curve. I do think it's a J curve, and I think we're on the downward slope of the J curve. For context, so last year when we did our report for this executive community, it was really hard to find any positive ROI examples. That's no longer true. So we're already starting to see the trend of the positive ROI examples happening now. Yes. I'm talking purely from an economic perspective. I'm not talking from any of the other social, environmental things that you're talking about. But I think that what happens is that, exactly, totally. But I think what happens is as the J curve, the ROI financial J curve starts to get into the upward slope, that starts to give us some of the spaciousness to start to think about solving the problems that will become externalities of that ROI upward slope if we don't think about them. I think that was a coherent thought.
But it's also just the weird thing. We talked about power earlier a lot as well, right? It's being forced right upon us from investment cycles, right, as well, right? It's just being forced. We have these GPUs. Now we have to use these. No one asked us, do we want this? It's like I think now just look. I've discussed this earlier on another episode with Mark Lawn. That was the one where we discussed that we're creating markets for technology, not technology for markets, right? And
totally.
and there's some aggressive narratives there that are being pushed with investment money that is so amazingly big in the valley right now. That is sort of forcing the hand of the world, right?
I'm going to go with a yes and on this one too, because if you look at the adoption curve, I'm sure you've seen the graph of like Facebook and LinkedIn and even mobile phones. And then you look at ChatGPT, it's literally a straight line. Like no technology like this has ever been adapted so fast. And no one was forcing people to do it. And for those listeners who haven't used AI yet, I'm just kidding. I mean, like, it's changed the way that I live my life. So there is a demand side pull for this. Yeah. What you're talking about, though, is also super interesting because it's like the Uber CTO coming out and saying, like, in the first quarter, we blew through our budget for the year for like our token economy, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, not maybe this transparently, not sure what we have to show for it from an ROI perspective. But this is part of that J curve where we're like figuring out, okay, everyone in Uber's using it. There isn't a cohesive theory about, or strategy maybe about how they're applying it. That's what that J curve does. And then we're going to start to get the lessons learned. We're going to figure out the assumptions that I was talking about earlier. And then I think we're starting to see that those assumptions are starting to pay off and we're going to go up the other side of the
but this is actually it's actually very 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 on point to what we started off discussing, because in the end I think the most of this economy is built around the belief or the hope that not just that we'll have personal productivity chatbots, because we already have that and we could do that with lesser data centers, but that we'll have autonomy and agentic AI that will do things autonomously. And this is back to exactly what we talked about in the beginning about scaffolding people, disciplining technology, all that. Because I also remember Eva Sorowski mentioning to me that they did some surveys saying that most executives didn't want autonomous machines. Most executives wanted, outcome-driven, specific machines that did the things they wanted them to do, and just that. So and maybe that's the bubble, right? The bubble is not built around personal productivity chatbots, because we know that works. People want that, as you said. People are adopting that like crazy, but maybe around the next level, right? The full,
that's right.
And that's right. Where I get nervous.
That's the hope. That's the bubble hope. I agree.
Yeah. The 18 data centers in Scotland is not about you getting ChatGPT to chat with you about your emails. That's about agents moving on their own across your ERP system and your CRM system and doing everything for you and contacting your customers and.
Yeah, and the truth is, I live, and I'm guessing you do too, in a very distorted world. Like the number of people that I know that have their own agents is, I would guess, above average for a broad swath of society. So I don't know that I can comment on it from a neutral enough perspective. But
there is a bubble, and we live in it. There's definitely a bubble.
There's definitely a bubble. There's no one is arguing that there isn't a bubble. But it is really curious because it's just like, this is where my brain short circuits. I have friends in Silicon Valley. Well, it's a big one. I know my brain short circuits all the time. I'm also aging, Lasse. It's really bad. My brain's like, what was that word I was looking for?
Yeah, exactly. I know. But you have friends. I
have friends in Silicon Valley, and their thesis, and I'm not going to defend it, and I'm not smart enough to know, but they're very smart people who are working in AI, and they're like, we are at AGI right now. And so it's interesting because it's like, where are we on this curve? The reason that I bring it up is because, like, I don't know that our brains can actually understand the exponential nature of AI. I mean, like, we don't do well understanding exponentiality.
No, but I think it was Brian Evergreen who said on the podcast that, these people in Silicon Valley, they've never worked in an enterprise. They don't know they don't understand the exponentiality.
I listened to that. That was such a good conversation.
But I agree. They don't understand the exponentiality of enterprises, honestly, how they work and why they don't even understand, why do we have lawyers? We hate lawyers. Yeah, okay, you hate lawyers. I get that. But, you can't just take them away, right?
100%. And going back to like applying the tool to every other business and, thinking about, is it hope? Like maybe this is the place where there isn't a crash, because once we hit that escape velocity on the exponential curve,
that there's
just so much that's generated in terms of value that our brains can't comprehend that right now.
This is weird. I'm just always worried about this arrogance, this tech arrogance, right? And these things are good at coding, great, right? But most cases, most people I've talked to, and when I say this, I say that, okay, so AI is typically very, very good when you're very, very ignorant. So the things you don't know about, right? That's where AI becomes good, because you don't know how to challenge its output. If that's
it's a perception of good. It might not actually be good. It's a perception of good, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because it could be hallucinating, and you don't know enough to challenge its hallucination. Yeah,
exactly. So you think it's great, right? Oh, this is such a this is a great brain surgeon. Let me go fix this brain. But you're not a brain surgeon, right? But it sounds really plausible,
believable.
Totally. Believable, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's and if that is true, and more people, and you're also not acknowledging, you understand exactly what I'm saying when I'm saying that, and everyone is like, yeah, I understand exactly that. When I'm an expert on something, I think AI is always flawed. Right, and that's a limit for autonomous machines, because I can use it in something. I have colleagues also who are like very, very smart financial controllers and auditors and all that, and they use it a lot, but they spend a lot of hours getting a really great output because they have to steer every minutiae part of the AI agent in their domain.
This comes back to what I was saying about where I think the T
that's
where
autonomy.
People are in their
but that's not autonomy, right? That's
it's
so
not
far
autonomy.
from autonomy.
No. Totally. It's very far from autonomy. And this is where we need the discernment.
Yeah.
To is it not just, back. Is it doing, yes, is it not just doing this thing correctly? Is it doing the thing that we want it to do?
Yeah. Yeah, you are the co-founder. I want to ask you this as well, right? Because you're the co-founder of Catalyst Constellations, Catalyst Constellations, right? What is this, and why is the Catalyst so important today? Now, you already mentioned that earlier, but what are you actually doing? What are you trying to set up here?
I'm going to tell the origin story really quickly first, because it helps give the context. So I was at Vodafone building out their global innovation program, and we didn't want to have an ivory tower of innovation. And so we're like, we're going to find the positive troublemakers that we know, Vodafone, global mobile telephony company, connect them, stop reinventing the wheel, and accelerate innovation. And the program was wildly successful, tens of millions of in-year revenue, annual ARR uplift for all of the things. It was wildly successful. But a few years in, I was burning out, and I was burning out because you couldn't be voluntold to participate in our Innovation Champion program. You had to volunteer. And I kept making the application process harder and harder, because the thing that I was trying to solve for was people would raise their hand and say that they wanted to do this, but then they would show up and they wouldn't really do a thing. Or there was this hardcore group of people that were moving so fast that I was having to move faster to take the barriers away. And I was like, I want more of those people. I was spending it was like kind of the 80-20 thing. I was spending 80% of my time trying to galvanize these people who raised their hand. No one had a gun to their head. And really, I was like, if I could have just doubled the number of the people who were like at the core group, we would have 10x more the impact, right?
Yeah.
But I was burning out as I was solving that problem. And so I hired an executive coach whose name is Tracy Lovejoy, who's now my co-CEO. And just quickly, she's an ethnographer and social scientist. She had done that in Microsoft's innovation world. She is a divinely inspired executive coach. That was her calling. She left and set up an agency. And the intersection is really great, because while we were working together, she was like, what is the thin red line of the people that I love working with? And so she did an ethnographic study of her favorite clients. And that became the foundational research about these people that we call Catalyst. Now, happily, I was one that she loved to work with. So she interviewed me, but serendipitously, I was at the end of her research. She's like, let me share with you what I found out. And it was like being hit by a bolt of lightning, because it helped me understand and contextualize my whole life. I started the recycling program in high school. I became senior class president to fix problems in college. Like wherever I was, whether it was a technology thing that I was advancing or whatever, I was always on the cutting edge. And there's a pain that comes with that, right? Like that's where burnout comes, because you're always like the lightning rod for the resistance. But anyway, so I was like, and there's the cringy part also, be like, oh, those people didn't want the change. That's the difference. I get it now. So we decided that I was really like right then and there, I was like, I want to help the people, the catalysts themselves, understand themselves so they can operate more effectively, which will hopefully be a force multiplier for positive change in the world. But I also want to work with organizations to help them understand, A, that they have these people and they should be tapping them, but B, how to think more holistically about how to bring some of that change readiness into their organization. So that's what we do now.
Great. But it also sounds like I should have had the other co-founder, because he's the brilliant one.
Oh, absolutely. You should have Tracy. Absolutely. I mean, I'm the beautiful one and she's the smart one. Tracy's beautiful too.
No, but no, but so you're trying just to basically find these people and try to empower these people to be more, these catalysts that you spoke about, the innovators, trying to build up their networks of those in companies,
That's
right?
part of it. But now we also work with organizations more holistically to say, like, they are great to tap, but how are you taking some of the things that they embody naturally and bring those attributes? It's everything that I was saying at the beginning, bring those to the organization because the change curve has moved. And so we don't think that you can create catalysts. The data says that you can't, but you can help people learn some of the essential skills to create change more effectively, which are crucial for catalysts because they're going to try to create change whether you ask them to or not.
Yeah, true.
But they're super helpful for the people that you are asking to create change.
Okay, and I have a final question before we get to the final question. And the final question I have before we get to the final question is a really terrible long one as well, but I'm going to ask you anyway, because I also think this could, tie into what you're doing in Catalyst Constellations, but also to your degree and everything. Because, we spoke in a prep chat about how I always try to challenge myself every year, because I'm invited to do a speech at, I've been at least for a couple of years, invited to do a presentation for a group of students at the Copenhagen Business School. Sorry, I couldn't find the word school. Copenhagen Business School, and every time I'm invited, I say I need to be able to now, a year after, come up with 18 new great master thesis ideas, and around AI and the change that's happening or whatever's happening. And if I can't do that, I should stop doing what I'm doing, because then I'm not, a catalyst or whatever. Then I'm not on the front of I'm not on frontier anymore. So I just want to ask you right now. I'm not going to ask you for 18. But just give me, if you were to come up with 5 good master thesis ideas right now that people should really investigate, what would they be? And what should people study right now?
This is a super fun question. So thank you for that. The pause, like, what is alive for me right now? Well, I actually have the one that I've had since 1995, the dissertation that I still haven't gotten to do, that I still think is insanely relevant, which is the intersection of the people who created the internet and all of the systems that sit on top, and the overlap of neurodivergence, particularly ADHD, and how, because they had ADHD, they built systems that really fit their attention span, that then made, as the technology disseminated, everyone have shorter and shorter attention spans. I think that's really fascinating.
That's interesting. So not human design, but ADHD design.
Yeah, exactly. It's literally designed for short attention spans. And every partner I've ever had has been in tech and had ADHD. So I've gotten also the personal upfront view on that. Discernment. I really think discernment right now, it's something that people historically in my life haven't talked about. But part of the reason that I'm obsessed with it now is because this is what catalysts do. You hear the percolations, you start to see the signal through the noise. And I am hearing other people in leadership positions talking about the importance of discernment. As a Buddhist, I think discernment is super important. And in this age of AI, but so how are we actually bringing discernment into an organizational structure? How do you teach discernment? How do you build that into some of the guardrails and operating processes, et cetera, as we have more and more agents and AI in our businesses?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Yeah.
I would be remiss if I didn't say, for us, we are, being a business, we don't always get the time to do the research that we just want to do. And so one of the research projects that we want to do is catalyst nature or nurture or both. It's just a super interesting conversation. And then you can extrapolate or take away from that probably more insights about how you help make how you can help cultivate more catalytic tendencies, which society is going to need moving forward. The other one, I'm going to talk about my son again, Lasse. The other one that I got from my son, he's the one who introduced me to Conway's Law, which is so fascinating for your people who haven't looked into that, just go nerd out on that. But Conway's Law is the one that I was talking about earlier, which says that the product is the result of the design of the organization. And if you haven't looked at it, you should go look at the evolution of SpaceX's Raptor engine, because they were thinking deeply about organizational design and specialization and all of the things that you were talking about earlier as they were trying to speed up the evolution of rockets. And it is literally rocket science. So it's like, it could be really slow and it could be, but like they were thinking deeply about this design. But so like, how does Conway's Law, how do you apply that to AI products? And especially with this intersection of these products are like, we want them to be supporting humanness, not less supporting humanness. And so there's a really interesting kind of snake eating its own tail there. And then this one came out of me prepping for the rest of the conversation, which is like the epistemology of AI literacy. We keep talking about AI literacy. Like right now it's the technologists who are really defining what AI literacy means. And so there's this like a very clear lens. It's like AI, I mean, it's technology and business impact, ROI in the sort of traditional sense. But what would it look like if we could think about this through different lenses and have different narratives and different people sort of talking about their version of AI literacy?
Nice. Okay, that's 4. Do I need one more?
No, that's 5.
I have ADHD and tech, discernment, culture and companies, SpaceX and Conway's Law, and epistemology of AI literacy.
Catalyst, nurture and nature.
Catalyst what?
Nurture and nature.
Okay. Good. I'm just writing them down. I don't know.
I'm glad you were checking me though. Yeah. I'm sneaky. I could have gotten, I could have tried.
But a real catalyst would have given me 6. Anyway, Shannon, just because they couldn't help it, they were just trying to be innovative.
That is usually me. Usually I have when I raise my hand, I'm like, I have 2 questions, not 1, 2 questions.
Yeah, but I was asked to do, it's a weird thing back in 2001 or something. I was a poet back then. I did all the poetry, and I was doing something where we're drawing on the street some poetic sentences, and we were supposed to do 10. And I did 11. And they came up to me afterwards and said, that is so perfect. That was exactly what we wanted. We wanted someone who did 11 or 12. It's like, I couldn't help it.
Think outside the box, totally.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Shannon is inside the box. Great. But
everyone who knows me knows that's totally true.
I think everyone who's heard this episode will think that's definitely not true. But Shannon, I think this has been a terrific conversation. I really enjoyed it. I think there's so much to unpack from it. I think we've gone deep rabbit hole. We've come across all the topics we wanted to discuss. And we also made a lot of really neat loops back to things we spoke about in the beginning. And that's always a good conversation, I think, when we tie things together in the end. Although you did just say Buddhist. I'm like, whoa, we could have unpacked that as well. And I saw you, and no one can see Shannon, but once she was talking, she was sitting with her hands above her head in a spire. And I'm like, closing her eyes. And I was always going to ask you, are you meditating now, Shannon? What are you doing? Why are you sitting like that? Just being.
It is so funny. The faces that I make when I do my deep thinking is like 100%. 100%.
So I got you to do deep thinking. That's really nice.
Yes.
But Shannon, I know you know that I have one final question, which is the capstone of the show. Are you ready for that one?
I'm so ready.
So Shannon, what is the only constant?
Okay, so we have to go back to Heraclitus, who actually said you can't step in the same river twice. We have to go all the way back there. Because it is about change for me, right? Interesting fun fact, he was called the dark philosopher. So they were the philosophers at the time were trying to figure out like what the organizing principles of the universe were. And he's like, the organizing principle is change. That is the only constant. And I think that that's interesting in terms of everything that we were talking about, because that has never been more true than it is now. But I'm also going to forward a little bit to the Stoics, because the Stoics actually came pretty directly out of a response to him and saying, yes, that's true. But we don't just have, they didn't know about the amygdala hijack. We don't just have the monkey brain or the amygdala hijack. We have choicefulness about how we respond to that. And so that was sort of the Stoics' take on it, which is exactly where I am. It is also what the Buddhists would say, right? And so the only constant is change, combined with our ability to have choicefulness with how we respond to it. So Marcus Aurelius said, I brought this quote for you. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength.
Great. That's a really nice framing, I think, of some other constants that have been agency, human agency. Obviously, I've had that before. And I think, maybe you did this in my favor, just, took so much history and Greek philosophy and Marcus Aurelius. I'm like, whoa, hey there.
That's where my brain went naturally. That's why we have such good conversations, Lasse.
Shannon, this is awesome. I think this has been a terrific and very, very great conversation, and I've loved every second of it. It's been really great. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Thanks for having me. I love your podcast so much. Thanks for doing the long form, deep thinking. It's really needed today.
Yeah, isn't it? I think so too. Carl Friston said on the show that if it takes more than 5 minutes to understand, it's probably worth your time.
I loved that one too. Totally.
Yeah, that's a motto, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you. Thank you for listening. If you liked this episode, share it with a friend or a colleague.